Exploration has always been a double-edged sword. It's what pushes humanity to the edge of its limits, uncovering new worlds and expanding the boundaries of the possible. But every step into the unknown carries a risk that, for some, has turned into tragedy. Welcome to the first episode of Fatal Curiosity, where we delve into the stories of those whose ventures into the mysterious led to deadly consequences. Today, we begin with a tale of ambition, hope, and heartbreak, the Nutty Putty Cave Incident. On a cool November evening in 2009, John Edward Jones, a 26-year-old medical student, was ready for an adventure. Married, with a 1-year-old daughter, John had come home to Utah for Thanksgiving. The holiday brought the Jones family together, and with it came an opportunity to relive a beloved childhood pastime, caving. For John, it wasn't just about nostalgia. It was about bonding with his family, sharing stories, and testing himself against the challenges of the underground. Growing up, John and his siblings often explored caves with their father. It was a tradition steeped in adventure and a sense of wonder. This time, the chosen destination was Nutty Putty Cave, a sprawling network of narrow tunnels and tight passages located just west of Utah Lake. Nutty Putty had a reputation, a place where experienced cavers could test their limits, but also one fraught with danger. It had been temporarily closed in 2004 due to safety concerns, only to reopen with new restrictions. For John, however, it seemed like the perfect challenge. That evening, John set out with his brother, Josh, and a group of friends. Flashlights flickered as they descended into the dark, their laughter echoing off the limestone walls. The initial passages were familiar territory, wide enough to maneuver comfortably with the promises of tighter challenges ahead. It was an exciting throwback to their younger days. As the group ventured deeper into the cave, they reached a section known for its narrowness. John, driven by curiosity and the spirit of adventure, decided to explore a tight, downward-sloping tunnel. He believed it would lead to a larger chamber, a discovery that would make the trip even more memorable. Crawling headfirst, he wriggled his way through the space, his breath echoing in the confined silence. But what John didn't realize was that he had misjudged the tunnel. What appeared to be an opening ahead was in fact a dead end. As he attempted to reverse, his body shifted, and the unyielding limestone walls gripped him tightly. His arms pinned at his side, his torso wedged in a space scarcely wider than his shoulders, John found himself trapped upside down in an almost vertical position. Panic began to set in as John realized the gravity of his situation. His shouts for help echoed through the narrow passages, reaching his brother and the rest of the group. They rushed to his aid, but there was little they could do. With no way to pull him free, they called for professional help. Within hours, a rescue operation was underway. Over 100 responders from multiple agencies converged on Nutty Putty Cave, determined to save John Edward Jones. Using a system of pulleys, ropes, and sheer human effort, they worked tirelessly to shift him from his precarious position. But for every inch they gained, the cave fought back. The tunnel's sharp downward slope and tight confines forced rescuers to work in unimaginable discomfort. The place was so narrow that rescuers had to maneuver carefully, sometimes barely able to breathe as they squeezed through tight passageways. Communication was difficult, and every moment was a calculated effort to avoid worsening John's position. For hours, they worked relentlessly, threading a rope around his legs, preparing to pull him free. Progress was slow, but for a brief moment, there was hope. As the rescuers tightened the ropes and began to pull, John shifted slightly. It seemed as though the rescue was within reach. But just as quickly, disaster struck. The pulley system, strained under the immense weight, snapped, sending the rescue team back to square one. The collapse left John wedged even tighter in the narrow crevice, and the situation grew more critical. Time was running out, and the pressure to save him mounted with every passing hour. The inverted angle of his body caused fluids to pool dangerously in his brain and chest, compromising his vital organs. Every moment was a race against the inevitable. Despite his growing distress, John remained remarkably composed, even as his condition deteriorated. His voice echoed through the cave, offering messages of love for his wife, Emily, and their young daughter. As the hours dragged on, his words, spoken with such clarity and strength, became a source of inspiration to the exhausted rescue team. As night fell on the second day, the rescuers pushed on, exhausted but resolute. Medical experts at the scene warned that the combined stress of being upside down and the lack of circulation could lead to irreversible damage. But still, the rescuers refused to stop. Every new effort was met with the same determination to pull John from the abyss. As the night wore on, hope seemed to diminish. John's condition worsened. The harsh reality of the situation set in. Despite the tireless efforts, the cave was too unforgiving, its grip too strong. His body began to succumb to the strain of his position. His breathing grew shallow, and the darkness of the cave seemed to close around him. By the early hours of November 25th, John Edward Jones passed away. After 27 grueling hours of effort, the unyielding cave had claimed another life. The rescue operation ended not in victory, but in heartbreak. The collective grief of the rescuers weighed heavily, knowing they had given everything, but it wasn't enough. In the weeks that followed, Nutty Putty Cave was permanently sealed. It became a memorial to John's life and a sobering reminder of the risk involved in underground exploration. His story, filled with bravery and love, will never be forgotten. John's journey is a tragic reminder of the fragility of life and the power of human curiosity. His story is one of love, resilience, and the devastating consequences of an unforgiving environment. And though his adventure ended in sorrow, it echoes to countless others who have ventured into the unknown, testing the limits of human endurance. Nutty Putty Cave stands as a silent witness to John's final moments, a permanent memorial to a life lost too soon. But his story is not the only one of tragedy born of curiosity. Across the world, adventurers continue to push the boundaries of the possible, sometimes paying the ultimate price. Next, we ascend to the icy heights of Mount Everest, where George Mallory's fateful climb ended in mystery and tragedy. High in the Himalayas, the world's tallest mountain loomed like a silent sentinel. Mount Everest, known as Chomolungma in Tibetan and Sagamartha in Nepali. For centuries, it had captivated the imaginations of adventurers, its majestic summit taunting those who dared to conquer it. Among the most driven of these adventurers was George Mallory, a man whose ambition and resolve would forever intertwine with Everest's mystique. The quest to summit Everest began long before Mallory's fateful expedition in 1924. The mountain had already claimed the lives of several earlier attempts, but that did little to deter the growing allure of the impossible. For Mallory, Everest wasn't just a peak to climb. It was the ultimate test of human endurance and spirit. Born in 1886 in England, George Mallory was no stranger to mountaineering. He had spent years honing his skills in the Alps and other rugged landscapes, gaining a reputation for his physical prowess and quiet determination. His first encounter with Everest came in 1921, during a reconnaissance expedition organized by the Royal Geographical Society. Though they didn't summit, the team gathered valuable information about the mountain, including the treacherous routes that would define the upcoming attempts. In 1922, Mallory returned to Everest as part of a larger British expedition. The team made history when they reached an unprecedented altitude of 26,000 feet. But despite their success, the conditions were brutal. Severe weather, exhausting physical strain, and the overwhelming challenge of navigating through thin air. This only fueled Mallory's obsession, and he began to believe that the summit could be reached. He wrote in his journal, "Because it's there," a phrase that would resonate forever in the world of exploration. Yet, the dream of summiting Everest came at a heavy cost. The following year, 1923, Mallory's personal and professional life was in turmoil. His wife, Ruth, had long struggled with her health, and Mallory's relentless pursuit of Everest meant he was often away, caught between duty to his family and the devotion to the mountain. His obsession deepened with each passing year, especially after hearing of a rival expedition led by the French. In the spring of 1924, Mallory was ready to return to Everest for a third time, but this would be no ordinary expedition. He was joined by Andrew Irvine, a young and talented climber with a strong scientific background. Together, they formed the core of the British team's final attempt to summit the mountain. Mallory has previously made the ascent to 26,000 feet, but now, with Irvine by his side and the improvements in equipment, he believed they stood a real chance of reaching the summit. Their plan was daring, to climb the north face of Everest, a steep and perilous route that had not been fully explored. To tackle the mountain in its rawest form, with limited oxygen and the ever-present threat of avalanches, crevices, and freezing temperatures. Mallory and Irvine would push themselves to the edge, hoping to succeed where others had failed. The journey to the summit was a grueling one, filled with setbacks and challenges that tested the very limits of human endurance. The first part of the ascent involved navigating the treacherous ice and snow of the North Col, a high-altitude plateau where the air was thin and the temperature well below freezing. Each step was a battle against the mountain's fierce resistance. By June 1924, the pair had established a series of camps along the mountain slopes. They reached the infamous third step, a massive rock face that blocked the final push to the summit. Mallory and Irvine were exhausted, their bodies racked by the elements. They had been climbing for days with only minimal rest, fighting fatigue, frostbite, and a growing sense of isolation. The final stage of their journey was now in sight, but the summit still seemed a distant dream. Despite the growing difficulties, Mallory was unwavering in his goal. He had always believed that Everest could be climbed, and this time, with Irvine at his side, he thought they were closer than ever before. But as they neared the summit, a critical decision had to be made. Should they push on despite the exhaustion and worsening conditions, or retreat to the safety of their camp? According to reports from other members of the expedition, Mallory and Irvine reached the third step on June 8, 1924, and pushed upwards from there, but no one knows for sure how close they came to the summit. In their final moments, it's believed that Mallory and Irvine reached a height of 28,000 feet, or perhaps even higher, nearly 1,000 feet from the summit. What happened next remains a mystery. The last known sighting of Mallory and Irvine came on the morning of June 8th, when they were spotted near the summit's base by fellow climbers. After that, they vanished into the mist of Everest's relentless, unforgiving weather. They never returned to camp. The final sighting of George Mallory and Andrew Irvine marked the beginning of one of Mount Everest's most enduring mysteries. As they disappeared into the vast, unpredictable wilderness of the mountain, no one could have foreseen that their fate would remain unsolved for 75 years. The British expedition team anxiously awaited their return at the camp, perched high on Everest's north face. Days passed, but Mallory and Irvine did not come back. The weather had grown worse, with fierce winds and biting cold enveloping the mountain. By June 9th, the team realized that something had gone terribly wrong. Despite their growing concern, the climbers were left with no choice but to retreat, leaving Everest summits untouched once again. With a sense of dread setting over them, they began their descent, unable to launch a full-scale search. They couldn't risk their own lives in the brutal conditions. The disappearance of Mallory and Irvine was a bitter blow to the expedition, but the mystery of what had happened to them would persist. As the days passed into weeks, Everest's secrets remained locked away. Mallory and Irvine had not left behind any clues. No footprints, no discarded gear, no sign of their final moments. The team searched the surrounding slopes, but the mountain had swallowed them whole. It seemed as though Everest had claimed 2 more lives, and the expedition was forced to leave the mountain, the summit still unconquered. Back in Britain, the loss of Mallory and Irvine was met with a mixture of grief and determination. Their disappearance cast a long shadow over the climbing world, and speculation about what had happened to them became a subject of heated debate. Had they succeeded in reaching the summit, or had they perished just short of their goal? The truth seemed tantalizingly close, yet out of reach. Years passed, and Mallory's family continued to hold out hope. His wife, Ruth, never truly accepted that her husband had died without knowing the fate of his final journey. As the years turned into decades, the mystery persisted, and Everest's allure grew even stronger. Expeditions continued, yet the fate of Mallory and Irvine remained a dark cloud over the mountain. Then, in 1933, nearly a decade after their disappearance, an expedition led by American climber Noel Odell returned to Everest, retracing Mallory and Irvine's final known path. Odell, who had been with the original British team, was adamant that Mallory and Irvine had reached the summit. He was convinced that they reached the top, only to succumb to the mountain's unforgiving terrain on their descent. Odell's theory would be further complicated by subsequent expeditions, and despite continued searches on North Face, no sign of Mallory and Irvine was found. The summit remained elusive to all but few, and the mystery of their disappearance only grew. For decades, their fate was a question mark in the annals of mountaineering. Finally, in 1999, the mystery finally took a turn. A team led by Conrad Anker, an experienced American mountaineer, returned to Everest with the goal of uncovering the truth about Mallory and Irvine's final climb. Equipped with advanced tools and technology, they scoured the northern face of the mountain where Mallory and Irvine had last been seen. On May 1st, 1999, nearly 75 years after their disappearance, the team made a groundbreaking discovery. High on the north face, at an altitude of about 26,000 feet, Conrad Anker and his team found the body of George Mallory. The discovery sent shockwaves through the mountaineering community. Mallory's body, remarkably preserved by the cold, was found near the second step, a major obstacle on the north face. His equipment and clothing suggested he had fallen, but the exact cause of death was still unclear. Crucially, Mallory's camera, which he had carried during his climb, was missing. Could it have held the evidence that would finally answer the question of whether Mallory and Irvine had reached the summit? The question of whether Mallory and Irvine had reached the summit before they perished still hangs in the air, unanswered. Some believe Mallory made it to the top, but the evidence remains circumstantial. Others argue that they were simply too far from the summit to claim success. The missing camera, possibly the last piece of the puzzle, was never found. Despite the discovery of Mallory's body, the mystery of his final ascent remains unsolved. Was Mallory the first to summit Everest? Or was his attempt thwarted by the harsh realities of the mountain? With no definitive answer, George Mallory's legacy remains etched into the history of Everest, a symbol of both human ambition and the unforgiving nature of exploration. On Everest slopes, the mountain continues to claim lives and dreams, but George Mallory's story is far from forgotten. His pursuit of the summit and the enduring question of whether he reached it remains one of the greatest mysteries in the history of human exploration. Quickly, just want to say thank you so much for watching. This is the first video on the channel, first time I've ever created a YouTube video, so I'm sure some things are a bit rough around the edges, but I'm totally open to any suggestions, so please leave them in the comment below. I really hope you enjoyed, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thanks.